Hello fans and friends, thank you for tuning back into this Bolivia Intelligence Corner. Today we're going to be talking about the hotspots on the Galapagos Islands. So we all know from biology class that the Galapagos Islands are the very biodiverse islands that Darwin formed his idea of evolution on. But not all of us know why these islands are in existence in the first place. The formation of the Galapagos is intimately tied to the history of the Nazca Plate on which they lie. The Galapagos are located on the very northern edge of the Nazca Plate, which is bounded by the Cocos, the Pacific, the South American, and the Antarctic plates. The Nazca Plate itself is currently drifting south, away from the Cocos Plate, and east away from the Pacific Plate. Since the net direction of drift is southeast, the Nazca Plate is colliding with the South American Plate. At the point of collision, the South American Plate, which is made of light continental crust, is riding up over the Nazca Plate, which is made of dense oceanic crust. This type of plate interaction is called subduction. As the Nazca Plate is forced into the mantle, it melts, and its melt products work their way up to the surface to form volcanoes. The land is further raised by the crumpling effect as the western edge of the continent rides up over the descending plate. The result of all of this is the Andes, a young, highly volcanic, rapidly growing mountain chain. This same movement of the Nazca Plate is responsible for producing the cluster of volcanic islands we call Galapagos. There is a large body of geophysical evidence for the existence of enormous plumes of hot mantle material that originate near the Earth's core and rise all the way to the crust. These plumes seem to be stable over many millions of years, and with time they burn through the crust to form an underwater volcano, which may eventually grow big enough to become an island. But because the crustal plate is in constant motion, the island will eventually move off of the hot spot, thereby making room for a second volcanic island, and a third and a fourth. Thus are archipelagos like the Galapagos formed. Islands farthest from the hotspot are older and more eroded, while islands near or on the hotspot are younger and steeper. Thus, Isla San Cristobal, the nearest to the mainland, is approximately 4 million years old and composed of eroded, rounded cones, while Isla Fernandina dates at less than 7,000 years and is considered to be one of the most active volcanoes in the world. According to Daniel M. Palacios in his article titled Oceanographic Characteristics of Biological Hotspots in the North Pacific, a Remote Sensing Perspective, there exists an equatorial undercurrent that tends to affect the hotspot of the Galapagos Islands. This hotspot, or plume, forms a surface of high phytoplankton biomass around the islands and provides a lot of biodiversity on the islands. However, these scientists discovered that when the equatorial undercurrent is known to weaken, the plume shrinks, and when the equatorial undercurrent strengthens, the plume expands. So they found that the strength of the hotspot corresponds directly to the strength of the equatorial currents.
So now we're going to talk about volcanoes. There are two types of volcano, shield volcano and composite cone volcano. But all of the volcanoes on the Galapagos are shield volcanoes. So these are formed from basalt, the most basic of all types of lava. Basalt has a very different chemical composition from the lavas that erupt from continental volcanoes and is much more fluid. Consequently, as the lava flow builds up to produce volcanic cone, the island's cones have a much shallower slope than those on the mainland. These shallow slope volcanoes are called shield volcanoes, and in the Galapagos, they're often compared to overturned soup bowls. Such shield volcanoes can be clearly seen in the younger western islands of Isabela and Fernandina. To the east coast, the volcanoes are lower and more eroded. So there are 12 Galapagos volcanoes, which range from being dormant to regularly active. The lowest height goes to water level, and then the highest peak is on Isabela Island, and it's 5,600 feet. So, a few of these are Ecuador. This volcano sits on the equator, which is why it's called Ecuador. It's a part of Isabela Island's volcano chain. It's considered dormant and is believed to have last erupted around 1,150. When sailing right along its coastline, you will witness its collapsed caldera with many features such as volcanic benches and a vast caldera floor. Darwin is a young volcano on Isabela Island, and it was named for the scientists who made the Galapagos world renowned. It last erupted in 1813. and Fernandina is considered the most active of the Galapagos volcanoes. It last erupted in 2009 and sits on an island of the same name, so that April 2009 eruption on Fernandina killed many Galapagos plants and animals, and they were unfortunate enough to be nearby. However, the lava has already cooled, forming a new part of the island, which can be colonized by hardy pioneer species. So this is what a lot of my article talked about. It really went in depth with the last eruption in Fernandina and how it kind of worked. But according to the scientists that wrote my article, its frequent eruptions are of great interest to volcanologists, but the remote and uninhabited nature of the island has prevented detailed investigation of previous eruptions. So speaking of previous eruptions, the recent volcanic eruptions, in the last 200 years, a remarkable 50 plus eruptions have occurred. So 44 years ago, there was a 5.5 magnitude and 33 kilometer depth on Ecuador. 4 years ago, there was a 5.3 magnitude eruption that had 10 kilometers of depth on Ecuador as well.
And finally, we're going to talk about earthquakes on the Galapagos, which are pretty small and do not really affect the small number of inhabitants on the island. This map shows some of the past earthquakes and where they were. The most recent earthquake was 6 months ago, of a 4.7 magnitude on the island of Ecuador. While the earthquakes didn't affect the people very much, 10 years ago, an 8.2 magnitude earthquake rocked northern Chile and caused a tsunami in the Galapagos.